get that?
Test.
Okay.
Still will stay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amanda Jones, the Director of Counseling Services. Thank you all so very much for coming today and for our virtual audience. We appreciate you all being here. Just want to introduce you all to Dr. Kevin Antshel. He is a professor of psychology and he is the director of the clinical psychology program at Syracuse University. Dr. Antshel is a licensed child and adolescent psychologist and is actively involved in clinical research. He's here today to talk about the signs and symptoms of anxiety and stress. He's going to help us to understand the theories that explain the onset and the maintenance of student anxiety and learn about evidence-based management strategies for student anxiety today. So here's Dr. Antshel here to talk about student stress and anxiety. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you for the introduction and also the opportunity to come and talk at Rome. This is a beautiful high school. Boy, as I walked in, I thought I was entering a nightclub. I don't know if we're taking any requests. I really like a little bit of Prince's later stuff, so Raspberry Beret would be good. So I hopefully am not making anybody uncomfortable without by taking my mask off. Please let me know if you do. I'd be happy to put it back on. I believe we've got this 6-foot CDC radius here. In fact, I think we probably have the 60-foot CDC radius. But again, I'm happy to make others comfortable. And if you're uncomfortable, please let Amanda know. And I'd be happy to do that. So actually, even before we get started, I want to say a thank you as a parent. Although my children are not in the Rome school district, I too am involved in education, and oftentimes all we hear as educators are the problems, and so I want to begin with an appreciative thank you for all that you do in education. Also, as a clinical child psychologist, I know I work quite closely with schools. Again, I haven't had the opportunity to work with Rome just because I'm situated in Syracuse, but again, if your district is anything like the Syracuse area district, it's a pleasure to work with schools because the schools are also very much invested in the best interests of the children. All right, so I'm going to be up here. Actually, usually when I talk, I like to be right down near my audience. because I teach at Syracuse University, and it's a way to keep the students awake. I can go by and touch them if they're falling asleep, but I promise I'm going to stay up here. And so our topic today, if I could figure out how to advance, where's the computer that I'm facing? There it is. All right, so the outline is we're going to talk about student stress and anxiety, and even though those two terms are used interchangeably, they're really quite different, and I think it's important that we all have a good understanding of the difference between stress and anxiety, because stress is good. Okay, if we have stress, we're able to build resilience. It's when stress continues and becomes anxiety that it can become concerning. All right, we're going to be talking about lots of data. All right, I'm a researcher, I'm a psychologist, and so I really like to believe that my opinions are informed by data, and so I'm hoping today to provide you some opinions that are all supported by what the research would support. We're going to talk about possible explanations for anxiety. As you'll soon hear, anxiety is increasing in today's youth. I would also say it's increasing in today's adults as well, and so we can talk about some explanations. We'll also talk about considerations for reducing the problem and the scope of student anxiety. And we'll have a particular emphasis there on COVID-19, and I'll end with some conclusions. Okay, so I like to keep this very informal. If you have questions along the way or questions come in from our virtual audience, I'm happy to address them as they go. And I'm told we go to 11. If I was doing an undergraduate class, there's no way I would go 2 hours straight because the eyeballs would be at half-mast, and so I'm certainly happy to take a break, and if you need a break, just raise your hand and say, hey buddy, I think I need a break, and we'll be happy to take one as a group. Oh, I want to make sure I'm doing this right. Okay, so I need to be right in front of it. All right, so I'm going to move over here. So the three goals Amanda already outlined is that at the end of our discussion today, hopefully you have a better understanding of the signs and symptoms of stress. Hopefully you have a better understanding about the theories that maintain anxiety. And I think it's important to understand the theory, because if you understand the theory behind it, it helps you to know what is and what isn't a good decision in the moment. All right, and so that's the reason I want to help you understand the theories. And then the third one, we're going to talk about evidence-based management strategies. All right, so again, these are PowerPoint slides. If you're anything like my undergraduate, they consider PowerPoint to be a sign that I'm old. In fact, that's usually what I hear. That and I use email. Those are what my undergraduates tell me are the two signs that I'm old. And so hopefully this won't be too torturous. All right, so let's begin with some definitions, just so we're all on the same page. All right, and so the definition for stress is that it is a response to a perceived threat. Okay, and so it's a response. It's a behavioral response, it's an emotional response, it's a cognitive response, it's a response in the moment to something that is a perceived threat. Okay, and so what might be a perceived threat to you may not be a perceived threat to someone else. So for example, I talk about my wedding day all the time. All right, I went out and played golf the morning of my wedding day. This was awesome. This was not a big occurrence. My wife was worried about the napkins and worried about if Uncle Leo was going to get along with Aunt Catherine. All right, and so we're taking the exact same event, i.e. a wedding, and there were two very different responses to that wedding. All right, and so that's an example of stress. On the other hand, anxiety is the reaction to the stress. Okay, and so it's your emotional response to the stressor. Okay, and so the stress is a reaction to an event, it's a reaction to a perceived threat, whereas anxiety is your reaction to the stress. Okay, and we're going to come back to the theme over and over again today that stress lives in the present tense. Anxiety lives in the future. Okay, and so again, if you walk out of here and say, oh, I really want to make my kids as anxious as I can this year, start talking a lot about college to 8th graders. Start talking a lot about middle school to elementary school students, right? I mean, that's the future, right? The future's uncertain, the future's undetermined, and that's where anxiety lives. Stress is very much a present day response, a present tense response, okay? So if you say, well, it's about the future, I'll say, well, that's not stress, that's anxiety. Okay, and so it's important that we understand the distinctions there. All right, so why this topic, you might ask? Okay, so why did Amanda ask me to come? And I will tell you, this is my 68th 68th of these that I've done for school districts in the Syracuse area, all right? And so every school, okay, not just RFA, is coming to this. And all you have to do is look at contemporary media. It's all over the media, right? And all of these were headlines that were taken from the past couple years, and it's all about anxiety, right? And so this is something that isn't just in Rome or isn't just in Syracuse, this is across the country, right? And so, again, this is a major issue that is really across the United States. It cuts across socioeconomic statuses, it cuts across race and ethnicity, it cuts across gender, and we're seeing increases in boys and girls, right? And so this is an important topic, and again, I applaud Amanda for seeing that this is an important topic. All right, and so here begins the data, all right? And so we asked, this was a survey, I'm looking for my pointer, in which parents, and this was back in 2015, were asked, are you worried about any of these happening to your child at any point? Okay, and so again, it's very much about the future. Are you worried about any of these happening at any point? And you will see that anxiety and depression was rated as 54% of the parents says, yes, I worry that at some point in their life my child is going to struggle with anxiety and depression. Okay, now we asked the children themselves, and these were actually high school students. Well, actually, no, not quite high school, so 13 to 17. I defer to you on a 13-year-old. That's probably 8th grade, 7th grade. And I have a 16-year-old that's a junior, so I'm assuming 17 is high school seniors. All right, and so they asked the teens, blank is a problem amongst people my age in the community where I live, right? You'll see the major problem is in dark, the minor problem is in lighter green, and the not a problem at all is in aqua, all right? And you'll see that anxiety and depression was rated by the teens as a problem for 96% of the teens. Okay? And again, this isn't just a small sample, this was over 200,000 teens that were surveyed by the Pew Research Center. All right? And so from the perspective of both the parents and the teens, the parents are saying, I'm worried about this, and the teens are saying, I'm worried about this as well, because this is a major problem or a minor problem where I live. Okay, so this is also looking at the stressors, all right? So not anxiety, but what causes students stress, all right? So what types of things are they focused on? Do they consider as perceived threats? And this is from 2018. It was the same group of 13 to 17-year-olds, and you'll see that the 4 things that stress students age 13 to 17 out the most are all associated with performance, right? And we're going to come back to that theme, that our culture, our society is really increasingly emphasizing performance and performance outcomes, all right? And so having a 3.7, well, that's good, but a 3.9, that's better, all right? And so very much around performance, and the teens themselves are perceiving it. Okay, that the number 1 stressor is getting good grades. Number 2, being physically attractive. Number 3, to have friends and fit in socially. And number 4, to be good at sports. All right, so again, what do all of them have in common? They're all an outcome. All right, and I would argue the majority of those are about some type of performance, that you're doing better than others, you're more attractive than others, you have a higher grade point average than others. And we're going to come back to that as anxiety. All right. And so as I alluded to already at the beginning, stress can be good, all right? And so stress is ubiquitous, all right? If you want to live in a stress-free environment, a stress-free world, I would tell you that's not healthy for adaptation, all right? That you have to have some stress in order to develop coping skills. You have to have some stress in order to develop resilience, all right? So a stress-free existence really isn't all that realistic, and I would argue is not good. Okay, this isn't good for you, all right? But constant and long-term chronic stress is not good, all right? So constant stress, chronic stress, over and over again. So for example, children that grow up in abusive homes, and there's chronic stress. They're afraid of being abused every day when they wake up, or every night when they go to bed, right? That's not good, all right? I'm not talking about that, okay? I am talking about things like the state test, all right, and you get stressed about the state test, you don't want to take the state test, and then you opt out of the state test. All right? I'm not here to say is the state test a good thing or a bad thing. I am here to say if you're concerned about your child's anxiety, the worst thing you can do is opt out of that state test. You're not teaching them to be resilient. You're not teaching them to manage stress and to come into face with stress. Again, I don't like the way the state tests are used in teacher performance, a bunch of things. But if you're asking me, is opting out going to help test anxiety? My answer would be, heck no. That's the worst thing you can do for test anxiety. Okay? And so it's ubiquitous. But chronic long-term stress is not good. Okay? And so as I already mentioned, a student who has no stress in their life, that's not realistic. And it really isn't associated with optimal adult functioning. Okay? And resilience is a process. Okay? Resilience is not an outcome. Being resilient is an outcome. Resilience is a process, which means it unfolds across time. Okay, you can't just have one stressor and all of a sudden you're resilient. It requires coming in contact with stressors across time, and it's a process. And it's a process that requires facing stressors. You will never develop resilience if you have no stress in your life. That's easy, all right? That resilience depends upon stress. Right? And so stress can be good. However, I want to be clear, I'm not talking about children that grow up in abusive homes where there's chronic long-term stress. That is not good. That's not good for anybody. Stress in short bursts is good, on the other hand. Okay, so anxiety, on the other hand, is characterized by apprehension about future stressors. As I've alluded to, stress is a present tense. Anxiety is about the future. Right? And so it's apprehension about these stressors in the future. Okay, so apprehension about a test coming up, apprehension about college. All right, I've got a high school junior female at home and a high school sophomore male at home. They have two very different perspectives on college. My son is like, well, if I can go and play Xbox somewhere and not have you tell me to get off, that's fine, I'll do it. My daughter is worried about college, very worried about college. All right, and so two very different perspectives about this stressor in the future. All right, so obviously my daughter's anxious about it, and my son is not. In fact, he could use a little bit of anxiety, I think. Okay, and so anxiety can take many different forms. It can be a subjective sense of unease. In other words, it's only obvious to you. People around you would say, you're anxious? You don't seem anxious. And so it's a subjective sense of unease. Okay, it can also be a set of behaviors, all right? And the ones I have up here are common ones in children, all right? So for example, those of you at the elementary school level, children who ask a lot of questions about the future. What's going to happen? Who's going to be there? What happens if it rains? Okay, that often is an attempt to reduce the uncertainty about the future and to reduce their anxiety. And so having lots of questions about the future can be a sign of anxiety. Also, fidgeting. Okay, my area of expertise is actually ADHD, right? And so I'm used to impulsive kids. I'm used to squirmy kids. I'm used to fidgety kids. The most common diagnosis that comes out of our ADHD clinic is not ADHD. It's anxiety, okay? And that the kids are fidgeting. Yeah, they're squirmy, but they're anxious about things. Okay? Yeah, they're impulsive, but that's because they don't want to wait for the future. The uncertainty of the future makes them anxious, and so they act impulsively to resolve things quickly. Right? And anxiety can also be a physiological response, so elevated heart rate. You feel dizzy, you feel nauseous, your hands feel clammy. All right? These are all things that have a very clear biology and physiology behind them. Okay, so this is, I like to infuse humor, in case you haven't already noticed. All right, and so this is one that you're going to be struggling with in a couple, well, actually, maybe not. I'm not sure how it's going to unfold this year, but I would say traditionally this time of year in my clinical child psychology practice, the anxious kids start to ramp up because they know what's coming. They know school's getting ready to start, and the kids especially who are concerned about separation anxiety, they start to ramp up their anxiety, right? And so you see the first day of school. I teach on a college campus, all right? And I happened to be on campus on Sunday, and I saw a lot of this happening on campus on Sunday when parents were dropping off their child at Syracuse University. There was tears, there was a lot of this going on, and so you could see anxiety can take many forms, and there for sure is a developmental trajectory. Okay, So what are common anxious symptoms? Right? In other words, you're saying, well, I've got a group of fourth graders. How do I know if they're anxious? Okay, and so this is the list from most common anxiety symptom down to less common but still occurring. Okay, and so the most common symptom of anxiety in children and adults is avoidance. Okay, that things make you anxious, and so you don't want to do it. And so you decide, I don't want to do this. This is not something I'm comfortable with, and so I'm going to avoid it. And so avoidance is the most common. Other symptoms are lots of needs for reassurance. These are the kids that are going to pepper you with lots of questions. Again, about the future. What's going to happen? Who's going to be there? What happens if it rains? What happens if I go to Chuck E. Cheese and don't like pizzas? Is there going to be something else for me to eat? Okay? These types of questions about the future are a common symptom of anxiety. The third one is physical complaints, particularly in elementary school kids. Headaches, stomach aches. Okay? And so again, if you're an elementary school instructor and you had what I call a frequent flyer to the nurse, it is possible that that youngster has anxiety, right? That they have headaches, stomach aches, etc. And quite often, the complaints serve as an avoidance. Okay? That if you look at the time that the youngster develops these physical complaints, often they're in anticipation of something coming that they're anxious about, a test, going outside, going to lunch and the noise that there is in the lunch, and that makes them anxious, whatever that might be. Okay, so now overly self-conscious. This is getting more into the high school age, the middle school. All right, that's also a symptom of anxiety. Difficulties with attention and restlessness. Again, that's what I have already alluded to. I think there's a tremendous amount of misdiagnosis of ADHD that occurs in our society. I'm not saying anything about Rome. I mean, I can speak only really about Syracuse. A lot of kids that are diagnosed with ADHD probably are better treated with anxiety interventions rather than a use of a medication. Right? And so there's a lot of anxiety that masquerades as ADHD. Perfectionism. Okay? Quite often parents say, well, how do I know the difference between perfectionism and ADHD? Or, no, excuse me, between anxiety, well, you know the answer now, between anxiety and ADHD. All right, and my answer, real quickly, involves perfectionism. Kids with ADHD are not perfectionists, okay? All right, if you show me a kid with ADHD that is a perfectionist, I'm going to say that kid's misdiagnosed. Kids who are anxious quite often have perfectionistic traits. They need to do it just right. They have to complete the whole thing before they move on, because they can't leave something half completed, because then it's something about the future. Okay, so when am I going to get back to complete this? How am I going to get back? All right, and then the last one is frequent school absences. All right, and so this is where I'm going to put in my plug as a clinical child psychologist, that homebound instruction for kids who are anxious is terrible. Okay, you are just going to make them more anxious. All right, because what does homebound do? Homebound allows them to avoid what we think is making them anxious, the school environment, the tests, the teachers, the peers, etc. All right, and so again, I won't get off on my tangent there, and hopefully at the end of this conversation today, you'll say, okay, I can understand the rationale why homebound may not be good for anxiety. That doesn't mean homebound should be thrown away. Kids with cancer, kids with other things who clearly need it, but if you're saying to me the primary complaint that this parent has as their kid is anxious, I would say don't consider homebound. This is not going to help them. Whoops, excuse me. All right, let me see if I can do this manually. Oh, it appears to be locked. All right, so maybe I can get some technology assistance. I tried to push the advance on the computer, it didn't go. I probably could do this by memory. I believe the next slide talks about anxiety and anxiety disorders. All right, and so when does anxiety become an anxiety disorder? All right. Anxiety, again, anxiety in and of itself in short bursts is not a problem. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Hold on, let me try it. Okay, yep. All right, thank you very much. I am quite sure it was something that I did, and so I apologize for that. All right, so what is normative anxiety? All right, I don't like to use the word normal. I don't think I'm in any position to decide what is and isn't normal, and so we're going to call this typical anxiety, normative anxiety. All right, and so it has a situation or a trigger. All right, again, you're anxious about it happening, not during the time. If it happens during, that's not anxiety, that's stress. Okay, and so anxiety is you're preparing for an exam, you're getting ready to perform at a conference, you're getting ready to give a speech, you're climbing a tall ladder. It's associated with these things here, apprehension, tension, nervousness, all these things we know are signs and symptoms of anxiety, yet normative anxiety is transient, okay? It doesn't continue, it doesn't persist, it doesn't stay with you, and it doesn't interfere with your well-being, and it doesn't prevent you from achieving your goals. Okay, you're anxious about giving the speech, yet you give up and you give the speech. Okay, you don't avoid it. All right, you don't call in sick the morning of and say, Amanda, I can't come. This isn't something I want to do. Okay, and so what happens when we cross over from anxiety into an anxiety disorder? Okay, so anxiety becomes disordered when the kid avoids. Okay, when the kid avoids age-appropriate activities, and usually the avoidance begins to impair their functioning across time. So let me give you an example. The kid is absent from school frequently, they're missing instruction, and now their reading achievement begins to go down. The kid is anxious about social experiences, they don't go to birthday parties, and what happens? Well, you're not going to be invited to birthday parties in the future. All right, and so the avoidance begins to interfere with their functioning. It also causes the family a great deal of stress. It causes the individual a great deal of distress. Okay, and so these are things that if you're saying, well, I'm not sure if the fourth grader in my class is just anxious or if he has an anxiety disorder, I would say, are these three things present? If you say, yes, they are, I would say, I believe that youngster has crossed from being anxious into having an anxiety disorder. Okay, so avoidance, impairment, and causing distress. Okay, how common is anxiety and anxiety disorder? Roughly 10 to 30% of the pediatric population at any point in the United States will have an anxiety disorder. Okay, and so you compare this to ADHD. ADHD is 5%. Depression is 3%. Okay? So if you're ever on Family Feud and the question is, what's the most common pediatric disorder, mental health? Anxiety. Okay? Anxiety is anywhere from 2 to 6 times more common than ADHD. Right? And so if you're a gambling person, and on my drive here, I drove right by Turning Stone, and you're trying to decide, does this kid in my classroom have ADHD or anxiety? You'd be much, much, much safer saying anxiety. Right? Anywhere from 2 to 6 times, 200 to 600% more common. Right? And so anxiety is certainly more common. Okay, so where does anxiety come from? All right, so we're going to come at this from a biological, and then a psychological, and then a social component. All right, and there is a biology to anxiety. All right, and biologically, temperament, all right? And so temperament is an inborn trait. You can show me a 3-month-old, and within a couple minutes, I'll be able to have a pretty good idea of that child's temperament. Is he easy? Is he difficult? Is he slow to warm up? Again, these are the kind of things that each of us come into the world with. Temperament is the precursor to personality. Okay, and so in adults, we don't talk about temperament as much. We talk about that person's personality. Right? But temperament is a biological construct, and the temperamental trait that's associated with anxiety is referred to as behavioral inhibition. And so behavioral inhibition is an inborn tendency to be unusually timid and or to show fear and withdrawal in novel situations. Okay? So new, unfamiliar, things that the person has not experienced before. Okay, there are kids who are quite outgoing. They're going to jump right into it. They think this is great. This is something new. It's also kids that are a little apprehensive at the beginning, but will warm up and will try this new thing. And then there are kids that are behaviorally inhibited. They have got a Vulcan grip on mom's leg at the playground because there are kids that they have never seen before. Right? And so this isn't the slow to warm up kids. These are the kids that never really warm up. And again, you can look at these in toddlers. You can look in 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. Those are you that are in pre-K. So the kids are nervous the first day of school. Well, that's common. The kid who still is not adjusting 2, 3, 4 weeks in and still is crying for mom, that most likely is a behaviorally inhibited child. Right? And so behavioral inhibition is enduring. Okay? So this tendency to withdraw from novelty is enduring. Right? And it isn't just the biology. It's how the parent or the teacher reacts to that behavioral inhibition that either turns it up or turns it down. Okay? So for example, quite often I work clinically with families of children in preschool, and the parent says, oh, I can't take my kid to Wegmans because it's overwhelming. He gets too anxious, he gets too nervous. I say, okay, well it sounds like you're avoiding teaching him or her that this is something that they can manage, this is something that they probably shouldn't be as anxious about. And the parent says, yes, and it just isn't worth it to me because it makes my shopping experience much worse. Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying you have to bring them. I am saying, unfortunately, as you're turning up the volume on that behavioral inhibition, right, that now the environment is responding in a way that's turning up. Okay, and so in psychology we call this a moderator, that it is a moderator and it's moderating this up in this particular case. Right? And so it's an enduring trait. Okay, so how about the psychology behind this? All right, and so we're going to talk about operant conditioning and classical conditioning and how anxiety is psychologically developed. Okay, and so let's take the example of dog bites. All right, and so boy, you're going to think you're back in intro to psychology as a college student. All right, and so unconditioned stimulus and conditioned stimulus. An unconditioned stimulus is you do not need to be taught this. You do not need to be trained this. Okay, you don't need to have any experience to know this is something that I don't want. Okay, and so an unconditioned stimulus is a dog bite. Okay, there's automatic pain that's associated with the dog bite. You don't need to experience this more than once to know I don't want this again. And so you don't need a history of learning. You don't need a learning curve on this. This is something that develops really quite quickly and in an automatic way. Okay, and so you have an unconditioned stimulus, which is the bite, which is associated with something that was originally neutral, the dog. Okay? Toddlers quite often are interested in this dog. They're curious about the dog until the dog bites. And then very quickly you have the bite, and the pain of the bite gets paired with the dog, which was originally neutral, and now becomes a conditioned stimulus. Okay, and so what happens is that you have a classically conditioned response, okay, which is I see a dog and I'm afraid. Okay, it isn't just the dog that bit me, it's anything with 4 legs. And I work with kids that are afraid of sheep, that are afraid of cows. I mean, they generalize that fear in a very diffuse way. Okay, and so I, as a clinical child psychologist, I know that this is how this happens. All right, and so what happens then is that the fear, you see a dog and you avoid it. Okay, we see a dog coming, I'm going to avoid this, and so this is something I don't want to have any parts of. And so I see a dog on this side of the street, I'm going to cross to the other side of the street so I don't have to come in contact with the dog. Right? And so what happens when you cross the other side of the street is that the anxiety is reduced, okay? Because you're out of the dog's reach for its mouth, its bite. All right? And so when the anxiety is reduced, that is a negative reinforcer. It's going to keep that avoidance response around. Okay? And so this overt avoidant response is what keeps it around. Okay? We can't keep our children from having these kind of things happen to us. And in fact, if you do, you don't allow them around any dogs in their entire life, again, I would make the argument you're not going to develop a healthy adult, a resilient adult. Okay, but what we can control, and what we're going to come back to when we talk about treatment, is the avoidant response. Right? So again, as a clinical child psychologist, I've got 2 Labrador retrievers at home. These 2 things would not bite anybody. They are drool machines, and they shed. No biting. All right? And so I walk my 2 labs, and I see a family ahead of me, and they cross to the other side of the street, and so what do? I cross the other side of the street with them. Oh, that's terrible, right? All right, well, and then I have a conversation with them. Well, actually, when you avoid me with the dogs, you are helping to perpetuate your child's anxiety. And then usually at that time, they say something about the police, and I need to get the heck away from them. All right, but you get the point, okay, that the anxiety leads to the avoidance, and the avoidance leads to continued anxiety. All right, so what keeps anxiety around? Okay, so why do children who are anxious quite often grow up to become teenagers who are anxious, who quite often grow up to become adults who are anxious? Okay, and so what keeps it around? What keeps it around is negative reinforcement. Okay, and so you really are going to feel like you're back in your intro psychology. All right, and so negative reinforcement, I don't want you thinking in terms of good and bad. Okay? Anything that is going to keep anxiety around is bad. Okay, this isn't, I don't want you thinking the negative is bad. All right, I want you thinking in terms of math. Positive reinforcement is the addition of something positive that increases the likelihood of the behavior happening again. Negative reinforcement is the removal of something unpleasant that increases the likelihood of the behavior happening again. All right, so think in terms of math. It'll help you remember this much better. All right, and so a reinforcer is anything that increases the probability of the behavior happening again. Okay, so let me give you an example of positive reinforcement for anxiety. The kid asks lots of questions, and so what does the parent or the teacher do? They answer all these questions. You're giving the anxiety attention. You're giving the fire gasoline with your attention. Okay, it also could be the questions serve to negatively reinforce, because when you answer the question, the kid's anxiety goes down because now they have an idea of what's going to happen today after school. Is it going to be pizza or hot dogs? All right, and again, this is an example of how the exact same behavior, a parent answering a kid's question, can serve as both a positive reinforcer and a negative reinforcer of anxiety. Okay, so here's an example. Over here on the left, the x-axis is time, and so early and later, and then the pain. Okay, and so you'll see that if you look at animal research, all right, animal research often happens in an operant chamber. All right, anybody ever offers you to go into an operant chamber, your answer is no. Okay, operant chambers, the floor is electrified. All right, and so the mouse is in the operant chamber. The electricity grids underneath the mouse turn on, and so how there is pain. Yet there's a lever in the corner that if the animal presses the lever, the pain goes away. Okay, and if you've ever seen one of these research, actually you can go on YouTube and find a lot of this. Very quickly, animals will figure out how to make the pain go away. Okay, and so we say that the pressing of the lever is negatively reinforced. We're taking away something unpleasant, which increases the probability of going to the lever in the future. All right, let's take humans. Okay, so over here is time. All right, and here is anxiety. Not pain, anxiety. All right, and so as you get closer and closer and closer to the event that you're anxious about, you get more and more anxious. And then you decide, zoinks, I don't want to do this, and you run away. Look what happens to that anxiety. It drops very quickly. It drops very quickly, and in fact, so quickly that you learn, okay, this is a good strategy. Okay, you're not even conscious of this, right? This is the same type of mechanism that operates for gambling, all right? That you get the immediate payout from pulling the slot. There's a very short time delay between you and, in this case, the positive reinforcer. Here we're talking about the negative reinforcer, and there's a very short, quick response and the reinforcer being delivered. Right? And so what keeps the anxiety around is negative reinforcement, sometimes positive reinforcement, but more times than not, negative reinforcement. All right, I'm going to pause for questions. Any questions about the theories that explain anxiety? Any questions from the virtual audience? No? All right, super. I'm going to keep going. And you tell me if you need a break, all right, because I can't see eyelids from way up here. In fact, I feel like I'm getting a suntan from up here. All right, so the question, are today's youth more anxious than they were in the past? Okay, and again, I'm going to go to data. All right, and so this is looking at college students. So 18 to 20-year-olds, this is a huge sample. Over 727,000 college students are in this sample. So quite large and very representative, we think. And it's the increase in anxiety between 2008 and 2014. Right? And so you'll see for females and males, there's an increase of roughly 50 to 60% in terms of anxiety. Right? And so 17% of college freshmen, sophomore, and junior who are female have an anxiety disorder diagnosis. 8% of males. Okay, so this is high school, all right? So looking at high school students who go to their school psychologist, all right? And so you'll see that between the years 2013 and 2017, just about every primary presenting problem you can go to a school counselor or school psychologist with was about the same or going down, except two things. Anxiety and depression. Right? In fact, if you'd like, I can come back at some point in the future and talk about depression, because anxiety, when it's untreated, often becomes depression. Okay? And so anxiety and depression are what the high school students are reporting increasing. And again, all you have to go is to the contemporary media. This is the New York Times Magazine, and you will see clearly this isn't something that's specific to Central New York. Okay, so why? So why are our youth today more anxious? Why am I here talking about anxiety as opposed to talking about how to field a better football team, all right, for example, although I don't really know anything about that. All right, I've got 6 explanations, right? And so these are 6 explanations that us psychologists believe help to explain it. Okay, so explanation number 6, and in fact I'm going from the highest to the lowest. All right, and so for example, probably the least, it accounts for the least number of cases, yet it does account. When we get down to explanation 1, this is the most common reason why us psychologists think today's youth are more anxious. Right? So number 6 is earlier puberty and sexualization. And interestingly, this is for girls only. Earlier puberty and sexualization for boys is associated with higher self-esteem, lower levels of anxiety. Early puberty and sexualization for girls is the inverse. It's associated with higher anxiety, lower self-esteem. Right? And so earlier puberty and sexualization, all you need to do is look at the endocrinology research over the last 50 years, and this is a fact. Okay? This is an opinion. This is a fact. That today's youth are entering menarche earlier than they were 20, 40, 50 years ago. Explanation number 5, I consider to be a positive explanation, is that today's youth are more likely and more ready to report these symptoms. Okay, so for example, I've been teaching on a college campus for 18 years. I for sure have seen an increased trend for people being comfortable raising their hand in class and saying, I have an anxiety disorder, I have OCD, I have depression. 18 years ago when I talked about this, there was much less comfort in the classroom for the college students to say, yes, I understand what you're talking about because I have that condition. Right? And so again, to me that signals somewhat, I didn't say a loss of, somewhat of a lower stigma around mental health issues. And so to me that signals is positive, all right, that today's youth feel more comfortable talking about these things. Okay, so explanation number 4 may be bumped up to explanation 3 or 2 in the future, is that today's youth are growing up in an era of much higher volatility. Okay? And so all I need to do is look out at my audience who are wearing masks and to realize this is a unique experience. This isn't something I've ever encountered before. So there must be something happening at the global level that would, all right? So obviously COVID-19, but this was in play even before COVID. Schools having lockdowns, mass shootings. Okay? All you need to do is turn on the news, which incidentally I do much less of nowadays. All you need to do is to turn on to news and to know that today's youth are growing up in a time of much less certainty. Remember, uncertainty about the future. All right? And there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty around COVID, and we're going to talk about that at the end. And so these are explanations 6, 5, and 4. Explanation number 3 is, I've already alluded to, all right, that increasingly our society is emphasizing performance, okay? Not the process of learning, okay? Not the enjoyment of learning, but the outcome. What grade did you get? Okay, what score did you get? All right, and so again, this isn't anything about RFA. This is what, I mean, again, I talk to educators all over the central New York region, and they usually are shaking their head when they're hearing this, that there's an increased emphasis on performance outcomes. Okay, and so I've got some examples of that. All right, and so again, these are data, and these are data from college students. Okay? These are data from college freshmen, all right? And so if you're interested in trends in college students over the last, looks like 30, 40 years, I highly recommend the SERP website, all right? It's the Cooperative Institutional Research Program at UCLA, and they track college freshmen across time, all right? And so what are the trends? All right, and so here is the percentage of college freshmen that say, my high school GPA was an A or an A+, and not just an A or an A+. Okay? And so you see very clearly in both males and females that the trend lines are going up. Okay? And so across time, college students are coming into college saying, I had very strong performance as a high school. Now again, you can make the argument that grade inflation is going on. I'm not here to debate that. I am here to say that college freshmen increasingly are reporting having A or A+. I know this is the one that I find more troubling. I don't think there's any issue at all with college freshmen increasingly saying I have an A or an A+. It's at what expense is that A or A+ exact? All right, and so here is the drive to achieve and emotional health. Okay, and so the drive to achieve in both males and females is going up, all right? And so these are those that say, I believe I'm above average, or I believe I'm in the highest 10% in my drive to achieve, all right? And so you look at the trends from 1985 to 2015, and both males and females, these college freshmen are saying, yes, I have a very strong drive to achieve. It's above average, all right? And again, I'll let you decide how, if 80% of the people are saying they're above average, how can anything be average? That's a whole nother conversation. But this is the one I'm most concerned about, particularly for girls, all right? That the emotional health, all right? The emotional health, the percentage that say my emotional health is above average or in the highest 10%, those are going down, okay? That college freshmen are coming onto campuses. In other words, they leave your high schools, or they leave your middle schools, go to your high schools, and then arrive on our campus having strong levels to achieve, but saying, my emotional health is not on the same trajectory, that there seems to be a divergence. Okay? Other things, perfectionism. Okay? And again, this is data. This isn't, again, this isn't anything about opinion. This was including 41,000 American, Canadian, and British college students, and they tracked perfectionistic traits across time. Okay? And the findings indicate that recent generations of young people perceive that others are more demanding of them, and that they have higher standards for themselves. Okay? They're more demanding of themselves, right? And so again, this isn't my opinion that perfectionism is increasing. This is based on data comparing trends across time over the last, I think this was 27 years. Okay, and so perfectionism is increasing in our society, all right? And so what's wrong with perfectionism, right? That's a good trait. I mean, it's important to do well, right? What happens is if we continue to move the ceiling, we also are having to move the floor, okay? And so let me explain what I'm talking about here, okay? And so moving the floor is, well, when do we start expecting perfectionism, okay? All right, so for example, any of you that are interested in college sports, college athletics, I happen to be, is that now we're giving scholarships to 8th graders. Okay, we're giving athletic scholarships to someone in 8th grade because we think that 8th grader has got such potential that by the time they're on our college campus in 4 years, they unquestionably are going to be a superstar. Okay, so we're moving the floor. All right, so when do we start expecting perfectionism? When is it becoming competitive? Hey, we're also moving the ceiling. Okay, now this is an actual online recommendation form that I completed for a student applying to medical school. Okay, so this was a college senior at Syracuse University in the spring, and I won't tell you the medical school, all right, but this was what I was being asked to determine about this student. How do they rate, all right, and you see where I ended up with this student. How do they rate compared to other college seniors was the prompt, all right? Unable to access, well, they shouldn't have asked me for a letter. Below average, well, they shouldn't have asked me for a letter. Average, okay, I can tell you that would be the kiss of death here, all right, that they would not, they would get lots of questions. Above average, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? You know, this kid's above average compared to other college students. Oh, are you kidding me? There are 4 above that, all right? Very good, well above, excellent, top, outstanding. The best I encountered in my career, all right, and the one you can't see is this person can walk on water and can make loaves appear, right? So we're moving the ceiling, okay, that being above average is not acceptable, all right, that we really can't just be average. Yet, what we fail to realize is that average is a statistical term. We can't all be above average. We can't. It's not possible. It's not statistically possible, because then if we're all above average, you're moving the floor, and therefore the ceiling has to move too. Right? And our kids know this. Our kids sense this. Our kids know this. All right? So I'm not a big fan of quotes, all right, but occasionally someone says something so well, like, oh, I can't paraphrase that. This is perfect. All right? And so if you're interested in what I'm talking about, I highly recommend this book by Jessica Lahey called The Gift of Failure. It's a wonderful book, I think. All right, and her quote is, as long as we continue to worship grades, kids will never believe us when we tell them that learning is valuable in and of itself. Okay? All right, again, this is a great quote that I think helps to capture what I for sure see in college students. And the college students arrive on our campus, if you look at the CIRP data from UCLA, they arrive on our campus like this, right? And so as long as we at the elementary level, at the high school level, at the college level, at the law school level, continue to worship grades, kids will never believe us when we say, well, learning is a process that you should enjoy. No. I just want to know, what grade did I get on this? All right, so number 2, I can feel the suspense. You really want to know. All right, so what's number 2 in why is anxiety increasing? All right, you knew there was going to be something about us adults in there. All right, so overprotective adults. Overprotective adults helps to explain why anxiety is increasing. All right, and so allow me to explain. All right, so how do overprotective adults act around anxious kids? Okay. Adults who interact with anxious students are more likely to do 4 things. Okay, number 1, take over and complete the task for the kid. I hear this all the time from parents. Oh, math is such a challenge for my daughter. She sits at home and she's crying and she's in tears at the kitchen table trying to do her math homework. This becomes a 2-hour odyssey. And so I just take it over, because we have to do dinner soon. I just take it over and complete the last 2 problems for her. Well, okay, you've taught this kid that if I cry long enough, mom's going to swoop in and complete this for me, or dad's going to swoop in and complete this. Number 2, act in a more restrictive or controlling manner. Hey, we're going to talk a lot about COVID-19 implications in this as it applies to anxiety. All right, but they act in a more restrictive or controlling manner. Number 3, they themselves exhibit anxious cognition such as catastrophizing. Okay? Again, as a child psychologist, I've got lots of anecdotes. I had a parent of a kid that came to our clinic for ADHD. This was an 8-year-old. They were in my office, and we were talking about the 8-year-old. This kid, I believe, was in 4th grade or 3rd grade. We were talking about their report card that they had just gotten. And the parent turned to the third grader and says, "How are you ever going to get to college with these types of grades?" And I said, "Goodness gracious, college? Let's just get them into 4th grade, and then we'll talk about what to do next." All right, so that's an example of catastrophizing. All right, that this is going to be worst come outcomes. All right, you've got 2s in English and language arts in 3rd grade, and you're never going to get to college. That's catastrophizing. All right, and so adults who interact with anxious kids are more likely to do that, and more likely to encourage or model themselves avoidance. All right, so things that I'm anxious about as a parent, I avoid. When my kid's looking at me saying, "All right, Dad had to go to Rome today. He says he's anxious about the throughway. He's not going on the throughway." All right. So I'm internalizing that when I'm anxious about something, my old man decides he's going to avoid. Maybe that's something I can do. Maybe that's something I should do. All right. And so these are the 4 things that we tend to do when we're around anxious kids. These adult behaviors, unfortunately, moderate. They turn up the volume. Okay, they turn up the volume so that the kid's anxiety becomes worse across time, not getting better. Okay, so they maintain, they exacerbate. All right? Anytime you have a focus on the future at the expense of the present, that's a problem. Okay, so let me say that again. Anytime you're focused on the future at the expense of the present, that's a problem, particularly for anxiety. Okay, you're thinking about college and your 8-year-old. No, you should be focused on what happens tomorrow, Thursday, in the 3rd grade classroom. And when you start focusing so much on the future, that's a problem. Okay? And if we as adults become too focused on the future, this interferes with allowing students to work through current obstacles. I, on a college campus, for sure see this. That I have students arrive on my campus and take my classes that I think their parent was their frontal lobe in high school. They organized, they planned, they made sure that junior knew what to do, and these kids, for some reason, are always from Long Island. And now they're 6 hours away from mom and dad in Long Island, and they have no idea how to work through the obstacles in their path. They have no idea. Okay? So again, if you're so focused on the future, and I have to think these parents back in Long Island were talking to their 9th grader about college, we're talking to their 10th grader, we're talking to their 11th grader about college. We're saying, "Oh, I need to do this for you so you get into a good college." Then when the kid actually gets to college, they're unprepared. And they don't know what to do because they haven't had to work through these obstacles. All right, and what happens is that these students can become increasingly reliant on adults. Learned helplessness, we call this. So the kid has learned, I can't do this without a parent. I can't. All right, and so what happens, and this has happened to me actually in office hours, I'm talking to the kid, and the kid says, "Is it okay if we get my parents on FaceTime? I want them to hear this." Okay, that's all right with me if it's all right with you. And inevitably, it becomes clear, oh, this was a frontal lobe parent. This parent was really behind that child's academic success, and now this kid is 6 hours away and has no idea what to do and is anxious about it. Hey, and so having a focus on the future at the expense of the present is problematic, all right? Again, you may say, "Oh, this will never happen." Oh, for sure, I have seen this, where I think the parents are more ecstatic when the kid graduates than the kid, him or herself. Okay? And so again, it's so funny. It's a truism. It's in the New Yorker. All right. So how does this relate to the future at the expense of the present. Well, if we're so focused on the future, okay, so focused on the future, it interferes with our ability to appreciate the present. All right, and so this is, again, all you have to do is look at the title here, and you know that if we're so focused on the kid not experiencing any failure in the present because the importance of the future, we're going to take over, we're going to help, we're going to support. Okay? So for example, my daughter is in a psychology class and she has a psychology experiment. Oh man, I could swoop in and we could develop something and we could get IRB approval and we can get this thing published. No, that's a terrible idea. Let her experience the challenges. Let her experiences, right? And so if we're so focused on keeping our kids happy, is that a problem? All right, and again, this is an interesting experiment which concluded that the more we over-promote happiness, we have to be happy, we have to have high self-esteem, we have to have everything going our way, we can't have things that make us nervous. The more we over-promote that, the more we increase maladaptive responses to negative emotions. Rumination. Okay, so rumination is when we continue to perseverate on something. We just can't move past it. We keep thinking about this over and over again. And so a culture over promotion, we have to be happy in the present, and our future depends on us doing well in the present. That promotes rumination about failures. Okay, it isn't just a problem about the future, it's a problem about the present, and that the youngster is more likely to ruminate, or the parent is more likely to ruminate about perceived failures. Okay, and so this is a great comic. All right, so why should I settle for a good self-esteem when with the right medication I can have a great self-esteem? Boy, if that doesn't capture a segment of our society. All right, I can feel the suspense. I can feel the suspense. What is the number one reason why today's youth are more anxious? Social media. Okay, all right, now I got you back. All right, you said, no, I'm not part of the problem. I don't think I like what you, oh, social media, you don't like it? I'm with you on that. My teen's addicted to that. I'm with you, buddy. All right, and so now I got you back. Whew. All right, and so social media is a facilitator of typical stressors, but on a grander scale. Okay, it's not creating new stresses. It's the same stresses that you and I had back when we were their age, but it's doing it on a different scale, exponential scale. Okay, so for example, let me give you an example. Heck, in high school, I was around when we had payphones. We certainly didn't have cell phones. In fact, when I talk about payphones to my college freshmen, inevitably, someone comes up after class and says, can you tell me more about this payphone? I don't understand what you're talking about. Is there a cell phone you have to put quarters in? Is that what you mean? They have no idea about it, right? All right, and so we didn't have cell phones, okay? And so if there was a party going on somewhere and I wasn't invited, I had to wait till Monday morning at school to figure that out or to hear about it. Now, if there's a party going on and you're not invited and you're sharing the Instagram feed with someone, you learn instantly. Instantly. Uh-oh, people are having fun and I'm not there. Right? And so it's a typical stressor, this exact same thing that you and I had when I had to wait 48 hours to learn I wasn't there. These kids have to wait 4.8 seconds to learn that they aren't there. Okay? And so it's a typical stressors but on a different scale. All right, smartphone ownership, okay? How has this changed across time? Okay, and so you look at the percentage of kids who own a smartphone. All right, 25%, 50, 100%. The year 2015, 2019, you will see that in 2015, to get to 50% of kids owning a smartphone, you had to go to age 13. In 2019, that's 10 years, 8 months. Okay, so if you want to know at what point do 50% of today's youth own a smartphone, not a cell phone, a flip phone like I used to have, a smartphone, okay, where you got Instagram, you got the internet, you've got texting capacity, etc., age 10 and a half. Okay, and so it's ubiquitous. This is something that is becoming a part of their existence. All right, and so how does this affect communication? All right, and so again, this is data, 13 to 17-year-olds. This is the same group here, and we're looking at 2012, 2018. How do they prefer to communicate? The only one that went down was in person. Okay, that's now in 2018, 32% say that's my favorite way to communicate. Texting is more preferred than in person. Okay, now again, that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. We're going to get to why it's linked to anxiety in a moment. Okay, how often do they check their social media? All right, so again, if you look at 2012 to 2018, the only thing that went up was those that were checking it more than once a day. That nearly doubled. Okay, 70% of today's teens are checking their social media more than once a day. Okay, the others went down. 31 to 8 was weekly, 17 to 3 was once a day, and 17 to 19 don't use it. Okay, and that's an interesting group, the group that isn't on there at all, right? Because they also are at risk for anxiety and depression as well. Right, so you can think about this as the Goldilocks phenomenon. Too little, that's not good. Too much, that's not good. There's a happy medium. Okay, there's a happy medium, and we'll talk in a moment about why that is. All right, so again, the frequency of social media use is, I'm going to go quickly through that. So almost constantly, 16%. 27% of teens will check it hourly. 30% will check it daily, so this is something that they're checking in with quite a bit. Again, this is social media, so texting, Instagram, etc. And I'm sure you've experienced this with your own child or with others, that if they don't have it, they become irritable. It's withdrawal. Okay, you take away alcohol from an alcoholic, and one of the first signs and symptoms they have is irritability. It's withdrawal. Same concept here with cell phone use, that they can become withdrawal. All right, okay, I understand, buddy, but how's this related to anxiety? That's what you're here to talk about, right? All right, and so how is it related to anxiety? It's related to anxiety in two main ways. Number one, the cell phones and the social media are associated with poor abilities to tolerate uncertainty. Okay? Uncertainty, we've talked about that uncertainty is about the future, uncertainty lives in the future, all right? And so having the Encyclopedia Britannica literally in your pocket isn't helping anxiety. I don't know about you, anytime I'm out with friends, I'm like, oh, what was the name of that Prince song from I don't know. Instead of saying, well, I'm going to wait home and I'm going to go consult my encyclopedia, I pull out Siri. Siri, what song did Prince sing in 1988? All right, and then I get something about the Prince of Dubai. All right, and so constant access leads to limit abilities to tolerate ambiguity, things that are ambiguous, things that are unclear. Again, if you have constant access, it limits our use ability to tolerate. Again, you and I had to grow up in a time when there was some ambiguity. Today's youth, much less, much lower levels of ambiguity. Okay, and the second one, which I think is the most powerful one, is that anxious youth use social media in a different way. Anxious youth use social media. In fact, it is such a reliable finding, we have a phrase about it: compare and despair. That they're looking through someone's Instagram feed and they don't realize they're looking at a highlight reel, and they go through and they, I don't look, oh boy, look at that, wow, oh no, I'm not. And again, these usually are not overt. These aren't things they talk about. They might be, but usually they're covert cognitions, self-talk. That anxious youth often use social media in a different way: compare and despair. And again, if you're asking me, well, what's one of the main reasons anxiety can lead to depression? That's it. Okay? That you start to get sad about this. You start to feel like you're somehow different. All right, the fear of missing out, FOMO. You probably have heard this acronym before, particularly if you are in the high school. All right, and so FOMO is more common in girls, and it's more common in Caucasians than it is in African American and Latinx population. Right? It is common. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's more common in Caucasian and females particularly. Okay, now again, I want to make sure I'm clear, because if you walk out of here and say, I'm taking my kid's social media away, you scared me. All right, I'm not saying that social media causes student anxiety. Okay, as I've alluded to already, it's that these platforms enable typical social stressors on a different scale, on a different magnitude, on a different time course. Okay, and so it isn't creating a new stressor, it's just turning up all the stuff that you and I had when we were in 8th grade. Right? It's turning it up. Okay, and so it isn't creating new ones, it's just increasing. It's exaggerating the typical ones. All right, let's change now to what can I do? All right, so what can I do as a teacher? What can I do as a parent? All right, the first thing you should realize is that of all of the mental health conditions that children are referred to see somebody like me for, the most undertreated condition we have is anxiety, right, which is really quite interesting. All right, and so half, all right, this to me is a troubling statistic, half of kids with any disorder are ever going to make contact with a treatment provider. That means 1 out of every 2 kids that has any type of mental health condition will never make contact with the treatment provider. Okay, and I teach in the medical school as well, and I know that the pediatricians and the pediatric training providers are equipping their future pediatricians to be adjunct mental health providers. Okay? The pediatricians of today, the family practice docs of today, are really getting much more mental health training than they ever did, because they're going to be trying to embed that into primary care practice, okay, as a way to be able to make these treatments available, accessible, and also to reduce the stigma. The parent says, I'm not going to a psychiatrist. Okay, and so the question was, well, what can I do? I would say the very first thing you should do as a teacher is assume that kid who's anxious is not being treated. Not. Okay, that only 32% of kids with an anxiety disorder ever make contact. All right, and so you should not assume that kid. In fact, I would say of every condition that you might have in your classroom, this is the one you can assume the least or the lowest number is getting treated. Okay, and so then if the kids are not being treated, what can I do in the classroom as a teacher? All right, so what can I do is first to understand the goal is not to eliminate student stress. The goal is not to eliminate student anxiety. That's unrealistic, and that's not good for future adult functioning. We want our kids to be resilient. They have to come in contact with stress. They have to learn to manage anxiety. You should express positive but realistic expectations. I know you can do this. I've seen you do this before. You're brave. Right? Again, these are positive but realistic expectations. Other things, reduce, but don't eliminate the anticipatory period. Okay? You have to allow the kid to know that the stressor is coming, to allow some anxiety to develop before they're ever going to manage it. All right, so let me give you an example of what I mean by the anticipatory period. All right, a couple years ago I was working with a kid. He was probably 9 or 10 years old, and the parent was reporting that my kid is afraid of shots. Very afraid of shots, and we almost had to have him in restraints at the pediatrician's office because he was kicking and squirming, etc. And I said, okay, well, how are you going to handle the shots? And she said, is it okay if the kid leaves the room? And she said, yep. All right, so the kid left the room, and the parent said, I'm going to tell him that we're going to Wegmans. And the pediatrician's office is right before Wegmans. I'm telling him we're going to Wegmans. And right before we get to Wegmans, I'm going to make a sharp right into the pediatrician's office, and we're going to pull in and get a shot. Right, that's an example of eliminating the anticipatory period. You don't tell the kid that they're getting a shot. You pull a sneak attack. Right? And so what happened? The kid got afraid of going to Wegmans. Okay? And the parent was saying, now I can't go shopping. I'm like, well, let me tell you, this was a bad idea. Right? So as a teacher, and you have an anxious kid who's anxious about X, Y, or Z, it's okay to reduce the anticipatory period. But if you eliminate it, you're doing that kid a disservice. Okay? You're doing that kid a disservice in their opportunity to manage that. Okay? You yourself should try to manage healthy ways of coping anxiety. This is a wonderful talk in COVID-19 times. All right, I'm not going to get into the politics of returning to school, returning not to school, etc. I'm here to talk about anxiety. All right? And if you're anxious about something, you should not avoid it. You should approach it in a safe, healthy way. But the more you say, well, COVID's out there, I'm shutting everything down, the more anxiety is going to stay around. Again, I'm not interested in the politics of health, and that I leave that to you. Right? And in fact, a couple years ago, I was contacted by the Post-Standard for a story about test anxiety. Let me emphasize that. It was a story about test anxiety, and the reporter said, tell me what you think about the opt-out movement for test anxiety. And I said, oh, that isn't a good idea, because if you allow the kid to avoid what makes them anxious, they're going to get anxious about tests. Right? And sure enough, that was in the story. To this day, and this was probably 2009, 2010, a while ago, to this day, I still get hate mail from parents, email, not hate email, saying, how dare you be in favor of state testing? It's my right as a parent to opt out. And again, that wasn't the story. The story wasn't about, is this a good thing, state testing? The story was, what does this do to test anxiety? Same concept here, okay? That you as an educator, you as a parent should be trying to manage healthy ways of handling anxiety, okay? And don't continue negative reinforcement. Hey, the more you allow the child to avoid things just because it makes them anxious, the more you're keeping anxiety around. Right? Remember, you avoid something, anxiety goes down temporarily. Temporarily. It is not going away. And in fact, if you avoid it, it's going to get stronger. All right? And so what can you do is to look and try to determine what is avoidant behaviors in your classroom. And sometimes they're sneaky. Lots of questions is an avoidant behavior. A kid who needs to know about the future is trying to avoid sitting with the uncertainty about the future. And those questions perpetuate. All right? And so why does exposure work? Why does having people face their anxieties work? Habituation. Hey, the more you encounter something, the less of a response you have. Right? So in college, and my sophomore year, I was so excited to move off campus. Oh, that dorm was terrible. And I was so excited to move off campus that I went and visited an apartment, and I said, oh, okay, this will do. Right? I didn't walk around the back of the apartment and see that there were train tracks roughly 50 yards from the apartment. Right? And so in August, when I moved in and that train came at night, and it came at 2:37 every night, I was awoken very quickly, got very stressed about the train. Okay? September, October, I've got a few of my friends from another college come and visit me, and the train comes rolling around at 2:37, scares the heck out of my friends. I'm still sleeping because I have habituated to. I've gotten used to that. Right? And so that's one reason why exposure works. Another reason why exposure works is that it allows you to reprocess the emotions around it. That wasn't that bad. Hey, I actually did okay on that test. That spider didn't kill me. Okay, you see what I'm saying? It allows you to reprocess. If you avoid, you're getting no opportunity to reprocess. Okay, your emotions are set. Okay, the third is self-efficacy, not self-esteem. Self-esteem is how we think about ourselves globally as a person. Okay, so self-efficacy is also known as confidence. It's our ability to manage one particular thing. okay? And so when people talk about themselves as a confident person, and I've been told by my wife to stop this, I usually say, well, what are you confident about? And she says, stop this, Kevin. Because confidence can't be a global, all right? Confidence is about particular things, all right? So exposure allows you to develop self-confidence. You know you can manage this. If you avoid, you got no opportunity. Okay? No opportunity to develop, I can do this. And extinction. What was previously being reinforced is now being placed on extinction, that the reinforcer is no longer available. I used to avoid, and now I'm not being allowed to avoid. And so what happens over time is that conditioned response becomes weaker. Okay, that conditioned response becomes weaker. All right, and so what happens with extinction? Anytime you place a behavior that was previously reinforced on extinction, you're going to get an extinction burst. This happens so reliably that we have a term for it. All right, so you got a child who's screaming. All right, any of you who have ever attempted to verbalize your child? Oh, that sounds illicit, doesn't it? It's when you let the kid scream in bed. Okay, that the kid's in bed screaming, you go in, you pick them up, go to baby, 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 and you lay the baby down. Next night, when the baby's unhappy and the baby's going to scream, you go in, all right, and so you see the cycle. All right, the process of verbalization, you let them scream. All right, now why is this so challenging for parents, and I was one, is that you get an extinction burst. Okay? This child has become accustomed to a certain behavior, helping to reduce the anxiety or the stress that they're having in the moment, and this is no longer available. So what happens is that you get a burst. You get an increase of the previously reinforced behavior temporarily in a way to test the environment. Is this really happening? Nobody's coming in here? Oh, I guess I got to go to 11 on the volume machine. Let's really get it. All right? And unfortunately, what happens is that a lot of the parents I work with, a lot of the school districts I consult with say, well, I did what you told me to do, and damn, things got worse. All right? And I'm like, yes, that's good. That means that the child has noticed a change in the contingencies. They're testing the contingencies. All right, and so again, this happens so reliably that I've learned across time to warn parents that this is going to be happening and to get them to reframe it in their own mind as, okay, this is good, this is good. Okay, so this is actual data. This is actual data from a parent, all right, and the parent was told not to answer the kids' questions about the future, okay, and the parent was told to do 3 days of baseline, count how many questions in a row your kid will ask, who's going to be there, what happens if it rains, what happens if mom doesn't come, okay? And actually this particular kid was texting their questions, right? So the kid was at a birthday party and they were getting anxious about the pickup, and so they would start to text the parent, and in this case the mother, all right? And so we said, all right, just continue to behave as normal for 3 days, and let's get a baseline of how often it's happening, okay? And you'll see it was happening 10, 11, 10 times on these 3 days, all right? And then we said on day 4, I want you to quit responding to these texts. I want you to quit answering the questions. I've told you that already, and I'm not telling you to ignore it, but I want you to quit responding, okay? And we warned the parent. We said, this is going to get worse, all right? And the parent came in once a week, and so look at what was happening on day 7. That kid sent 28 texts in a row. 28. Man, talk about spam. That kid sent 28 texts in a row, and the parent says, you sure you got a license for what you're doing? This seems like this is a terrible idea. And we, oh, no, this is a good. This is a burst. Okay, this is a burst. Your child has noticed that a previously reinforced behavior, i.e. texting, is being placed on extinction. Your child has noticed the change in the contingency. Just stick with it. They came back in 2 weeks, and they said, you deserve a Nobel Prize for what you are doing here, my friend. All right? And so you have to be ready. All right? In fact, I tell parents all the time, either you're in it to win it, or you're not doing this. Okay? Because if you say, oh, I'm going to ignore, damn, 27 texts, I can't ignore this, and you send a text back on the 27th, you have just taught your child to be remarkably persistent. To keep sending the text, and eventually mom will do it. She's going to break down. You're in it to win it, or you say, nope, I don't believe what you're telling me, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Okay, so remember, the extinction burst. So you're trying to put the child in your classroom who goes to the school nurse. You're trying to put that behavior, going to the nurse, on extinction. First couple times, you don't allow the child to go to the nurse, what's going to happen? All right, if it was just the stomach, it's going to be stomach, it's going to be head, it's going to be elbow, it could be right knee. All right, that's an extinction burst. You're going to see an increase in the behavior. The kid might cry, the kid might go under the table, the kid might refuse to talk, the kid might do lots of things. Okay? There are ways to intervene that you attempt to stop that behavior because it's getting lots of attention from his peers, but you don't allow the nurse, okay? Because that, again, is the burst. All right, other strategies, right? And this is something that I, for sure, attempt to embody as a college professor. Shift the focus, all right? If we're so focused on grades, our kids are never going to enjoy learning for the process, right? And so office hours, inevitably the students come in and they want to know, how can I get an A on the next test? Very quickly I move away from that. I say, well, tell me how you studied for the last, okay, you did this. Here are some processes you might want to try. Here's some strategies you might want to, I never mentioned anything about an A. Never mentioned anything about they want to go to medical school and they need an A in this class. I'm very clearly trying to move towards the process. Okay, so other things. Remove attention from anxious behaviors. Okay, so reassurance seeking, the constant questions, the texting, are you going to be there? Cease inadvertent negative and positive reinforcement if it's existing. All right? Also identify when you're placing something on extinction. Okay, so for example, the kid wants to go to the nurse. Can I go to the nurse? All right. You say, I've already answered that question. Please go back to work. You're telling the kid, I'm not going to answer that question. Okay, this is not going to be something that's going to happen. So you're helping the kid to know, all right, and again, the kid's not, oh, you're placing this behavior on extinction. All right, but you are going to alert, you're going to warn, you're going to notify that behaviors are being placed on extinction. And most importantly, catch them when they're good. Catch them engaging in behaviors that you want to see more of. So the kid goes through an entire day without going to the school nurse. All right? Instead of saying, well, that's his job. He's a third grader. He shouldn't be going. No. Catch them when they're good. Say, I am real proud of you. Thank you. All right? Again, small little things like that you notice the positive behaviors you want to see more of. Okay? And so catch them when they're good. Increase positive reinforcement. Nice job continuing on your work, or whatever it might be. Okay? These are all examples of strategies. All right, it's important, and actually when I'm in Rome, this is a great opportunity to use this quote. Rome wasn't built in one day. Hey, that's kind of a pun, isn't it? All right, I use this quote all the time. Now it really has some interesting double take here. All right, that you have to be patient. Okay, you have to be patient, particularly through that extinction burst. And if you don't get an extinction burst, I got unpleasant news for you. You have not identified what was holding that behavior in place. You have not identified the reinforcer. It could be attention from his or her peers that's reinforcing. It could be that when they go to the nurse and they get a lollipop, that's what's maintained. Again, you have to think about that if you don't see an extinction burst when you take it away, it's not avoiding the math worksheet that was keeping this around. Okay? And so you have to be patient. All right? And in fact, we call it shaping. So you're going to reinforce each successive step. So let's say we have a kid who's avoiding school completely. All right? So we are going to shape the behavior of coming back to school full time. Okay, we're going to reinforce them getting on the bus. We're going to reinforce them going for a half day. We're going to reinforce them going for the full day. All right? In other words, we're going to have successive steps along the way. Okay? And the PREMAC principle says you use high-frequency behaviors to reinforce low-frequency behaviors. Okay, now, I like to call this Grandma's rule. I don't know about you, but when I went to Grandma's house, I had to have my broccoli before I could have my ice cream. I could not go right to ice cream. I had to have my broccoli. So broccoli was a low preferred activity. To this day, I don't really like it. Ice cream, to this day, I love it. Okay? But I couldn't get access to my ice cream until I had my broccoli. Okay? The kid loves video games, or the kid loves recess, or the kid loves something, but is avoiding these things that are making them anxious. The PREMAC principle says that kid can't get access to this high preferred activity until they go through the low preferred activity. Okay? Again, these are ideas to consider in your classroom. Okay, so other things to remember is to respect ideas. Don't invalidate. Oh, that's the worst thing you can do for a kid who's anxious. Okay, so for example, an example of invalidation is, and I see this, unfortunately, as a father, it upsets me. I see this much more in dads than I do in mom. The dad turns to the 8-year-old and says, "What are you afraid of?" That's nothing. Okay? And so again, that is you're not respecting the feelings. Okay? And so respect the feelings. Don't empower them, but respect them. Validation doesn't always mean agreement. Okay? It doesn't always mean agreement, right? And so I've got some examples of validating, right? And so these are things not to say. Pull yourself together. When are you going to grow up? You need to toughen up. All right, so these are much more validating. Not agreeing, okay? We're not saying, yes, I see why you're anxious. You can avoid that, okay? Oh, excuse me. So for example, I know this is hard for you. What do you need right now? Want to talk about it? How can I help? Take some time. It's okay. Okay, those are examples of how you respect feelings. You don't invalidate, all right? Because invalidation teaches the youngster that my feelings are not accurate, my feelings are not appropriate. And unfortunately, what we know about that as they develop, it can turn into personality disorders, self-cutting, mutilation. A lot of the non-suicidal self-injurious behavior points to histories of chronic invalidation, all right? That they were taught that my feelings aren't accurate, and I am now having to turn to these other behaviors as a way to feel normal. Okay, so let's get to COVID specifics, and then if we you guys have been remarkably quiet, so if we have questions, comments, I'd be happy to answer them after this. All right, and so what are things that you can do? Again, this is about anxiety and stress. This is not about how can I ensure my public health in my classroom. Okay, you'll get guidance from that about your superintendent and others. I'm here to say, how can you handle student stress and anxiety? Okay, and actually this applies both in person and also in virtual. Okay, if you're doing things virtually and you notice the kids are anxious. All right, so stay calm and listen. Probably the most important thing you can do is to establish some consistency. Remember, anxiety is uncertainty. What's the antidote to that poison? Consistency. Right? And so establishing routines. If you have a routine in your classroom and you switch to being online, to the extent possible, try to maintain some routine, or if you can, the routine you had before. Foster sense of control. Be a role model. Demonstrate deep breathing. So for example, you can tell a kid in your classroom is anxious. You demonstrate diaphragmatic breathing, and you say something like, I can tell you what always helps me. Deep breathing, right? Again, you're doing on the spot, you're giving that child a technique that we know helps to lower blood pressure. Lowering blood pressure is the opposite of what anxiety wants to do. Anxiety wants to increase your blood pressure, right? And so lowering it. Focusing on the positives. Okay, focus on the positive. COVID for sure has changed lots of things. I can tell you that a positive outcome is that I have connected a lot more with my children. All right, my two are around. I was carpooling them all over God's green earth before. They would go to their sporting events or whatever event, and I would sit and watch. Well, all that shut down. All right, and so trying to focus on some positive, all right, the proverbial silver lining. Building the immune system, sleep, rest, exercise, diet, okay? These are all things that will help you regardless. And maintain some connection, cohesion with students. All right, I know this can be hard in a virtual environment if you eventually go virtual, but maintaining some type of connection can help. So stay calm, listen. Okay, so other things that are COVID specific, all right, is to monitor television, monitor news media, monitor social media, okay? And this applies to you as well, okay? Too much of the uncertainty. I mean, we live in a horribly polarizing time. The polarity of our society is going to increase in the next 69 days. The election is 69 days from today. All right? It is not going to get any lower. All right? And so all this polarity, all this uncertainty about the future, what's another 4 years going to look like? I mean, these are all things that if you say, well, I'm watching too much of this and it's really upset me, I need to have some moderation. All right, and again, for kids that are anxious, ask them questions about social media. Talk with their parents about social media, all right, and having to keep tabs on that. All right, so taking time to talk, all right, so I didn't know the age groups I was having, so these are really organized according to what age group you're going to be interfacing with. So for example, for early elementary school children, okay, you provide brief, simple information that is going to balance COVID-19 fact and appropriate reassurances, all right, so you're going to attempt to balance what you're saying with COVID-19 fact. It's important to keep your social distance. It's important to wear your mask. It's important to wash your hands. All the things that are factual with appropriate reassurances. All right, we have lots of scientists that are working on this. We are optimistic that this is going to be something that is not going to be around forever. I mean, that's examples of appropriate reassurances. All right, what I think is an inappropriate reassurance is we're going to have a vaccine next week. Okay, and then the kid comes back to you on Tuesday and says, where's the vaccine you talked about? All right, so other things for elementary. Give simple examples of the steps people make every day to stop germs and stay healthy, such as adults are working hard. Okay, everybody remember to wash their hands. Again, for elementary school students, a lot of it is very simple, highly brief, and focused on specific behaviors. For upper elementary, early middle school, attempt to separate rumor from fantasy. It is amazing what type of rumor and fantasy is out there on the internet, on social media. It's amazing. All right, conspiracy theories about everything. All right, and where you and I may know, I'm turning that off. 11-year-old who now has a smartphone for the first time says, what are they talking about here? Oh gosh, does that mean I should do this? All right, and so attempt to separate rumor and fantasy from reality. Also discuss community efforts people are doing to avoid germs from spreading. Okay, again, you're focusing on the future and what is happening in the future. And then for high school students, you're going to provide them appropriate sources of facts. Okay, you can provide them CDC, you can provide them also honest, accurate, and factual information about the status of COVID-19, and you can engage them in decision-making about plans, schedules, other things. Giving students autonomy helps to reduce anxiety, all right? And so engage them in the decision-making about what's going to happen in the classroom, all right? And for all, encourage children to verbalize, right? Encourage children of all ages to talk, to verbalize their thoughts and feelings, and you be a good listener. All right, that's important. All right, so I usually get asked, well, what's a book or a resource that I could recommend to parents? All right, and so these are three, and actually they go in chronological age, and so if you've got an early child, or you got a early adolescent, or if you've got a high schooler, these are books that I think are very good for parents. And so again, if you've got an anxious kid in your class and you'd like to equip the parent with some resources, these are three great books. I have no connection to the publisher or authors, I just think they're very good. Okay, there's also some books for the students themselves, and so these aren't for the parents to read, these are for the students, and the one on the left, as you can tell by the cover, is meant for younger children, and then the one on the right, as you can tell by the cover, is meant for teenagers. Okay, so again, I'm just helping you to know what I know as a clinical psychologist, that I have had some success with these books, and I've heard good things from parents. All right, and you can get them in the library. All right, these aren't things you have to go out and buy or encourage them. All right, and so those are some resources. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. All right, and so my conclusions, hopefully, you have an idea of what's coming, is that anxiety is increasing. All right, that's not opinion. That's not just something that I'm here to say, but hopefully I've convinced you with data. Okay, also, the increases are likely related to these 6 things, which we've talked about. All right, and the 3 we spent the most time on are the emphasis on performance, the overprotection, and the social media, but we also talked about the volatility, right? That we are growing up, or our children are growing up in an environment of volatility. And if you walk away and say, oh, that guy talked about a lot, I can't remember it all, the one thing I hope you remember is to stop negative reinforcement, right? The more you allow the kid to avoid things that make them anxious, the more you're keeping anxiety around, all right? And so really look at the behaviors, right? I talk with parents all the time about acting like a scientist. Oh, this is fun, right? And so you have a kid who's exhibiting a behavior, you're going to think about hypotheses. Why is he doing this now? What's he trying to get about it? All right, okay, I've got some hypotheses, all right? And then the next answer is, or the next question is, okay, is this a behavior I want to see more of? Oh, no, I don't want to see any more of this. Well, then how can I make sure I don't reinforce this either positively with attention or negatively by allowing him to avoid whatever it is that's causing him anxiety? All right, so I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm going to warn you, I'm going to gear them all towards my narrow area of expertise, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
We have a couple questions. Really quick, so let's say you have a child who is anxious about going to school, and so they're going to want to bring something with them from home. Like, let's just start with a picture, and the next thing you know, they're bringing a photo album. Next thing you know, they're bringing a whole bag of stuff. And then they want to keep, so we have like another negative behavior that's kind of, they're still coming to school, but they're bringing all these personal belongings with them. How do you help us to try to find that balance at school?
Okay, that's a great question. I don't know if I need to repeat it for the folks online, or is that mic going to them? Yep, okay. So the question is, the child is bringing a transitional object, is what we call those in psychology, that it's attempt to reduce the anxiety. It's a transition between home, where these things are, and the kid feels safe, to school, and so we call them a transitional. So the kid begins with the teddy bear, and the teddy bear's in the cubby, and the next day he comes in with a Tonka truck, and then the day after that it's an umbrella. The fourth thing he brings in his dog, and then we got a bunch of things that the kid is having, right? And so the question is this a good thing? Well, let me actually begin with that, and the answer is no. Okay, this is not a good thing, all right? Transitional objects are meant as a transition period. If a transition period becomes longer and longer and longer, it is no longer a transition, it actually is becoming permanent, right? And so I think in terms of a combination of proactive and reactive strategies. The proactive strategy is, okay, I remember what this guy said, and so I'm going to proactively tell the child that they are allowed one and only one, right? Again, that would help in the future, all right? But let's say this kid's already got 9 things in his desk. How do we handle that, okay? Again, you want to try to emphasize autonomy. All right, so you've got 9 things here. All right, I would like for you to get to 8 things tomorrow, all right? Which of these do you think you might be able to take home? All right, and you're going, oh, I bet there's going to be a burst, and you're going to be right. Okay, there is going to be a burst, and so you're going to have to ride through the burst. The kid's going to say, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. No, I need all 9 things. And so making sure you're not inadvertently giving that lots of energy, lots of attention. And so I would say something like, okay, I'm going to come back in a few minutes, and I'm going to ask you which of these you'd like to go. All right, again, you're going to give the kid space, you're going to give the kid time, but you are not going to allow the kid to keep all 9. Okay, because if you give in, you have just taught the kid, my words are hollow, you can ignore them if you want. All right, and so to answer your question, we're going to attempt to shape. 9 becomes 8, becomes 7, becomes 6, becomes 5, becomes 4. All right, and you're also going to give lots of positive, praising attention to the kid when they're doing it. Great job, high five, I know you can do this, look at this, don't you feel great? You know, you're not just going to say, well, that's your job is to take it home. You're going to give lots of attention to the positive, brave behaviors. All right, and so I'd say a combination of proactive, if you can see where this is going and keep it from happening, that's great. But if you've got yourself in a situation you need to be reactive, shape and allow the kid to choose. Okay, and if the kid says, I'm not choosing, then I would get the parent on board and I would work with the parent about having the parent come in and take one of those things home. And then the next day they come in and they take another one home. Right? And again, you have to be ready for the burst because the burst is coming. Good question.
So to build on the extinction burst, there was a follow-up question. How does a parent or an educator know that after an extinction burst that a behavior is truly gone?
Yes, all right, the great question is, all right, so after a burst, right, and so you remember the slide, and you saw the slide got down to 0, that the kid eventually was sending text, all right? The question is you don't know that it's truly gone, okay? And in fact, it can come back, and we call that a spontaneous recovery, all right? That it's gone for some time, and then 2 weeks later, there's some other stressor in the kid's life, and they feel the need to go back to this behavior. Okay, the good news is when the spontaneous recovery occurs, it's usually lower in intensity. Okay, so instead of 10 like they were at the baseline, they're usually going to be probably 5 or 6. And it's easier to put on re-extinction. All right, and so if it comes back, and quite often it does, all right, in fact, it comes back so reliably, we call it, or we have a term for it, spontaneous recovery. It's usually lower in intensity and easier to put back on re-extinction. All right, but you have to remember that. Oh, here comes that behavior again. All right, the worst thing you can do is turn to kid and say, I thought we were through with this. Why are you doing this? Because now you're giving that positive attention. Okay, good question. Anything else?
I do have some more questions from the virtual audience, but if anybody in the physical audience has a question, just raise your hand, I'll come over to you. Could a child just be internalizing and hiding the behavior or repressing the behavior to avoid upsetting someone or upsetting themselves?
Yes. All right, that's a great question. Could the kid be internalizing this or repressing this? All right, and the answer to that is absolutely. Okay? And so again, I have not seen kids from the Rome School District, and so don't think I'm talking about your kid, but there's a number of kids that I've seen in the Syracuse area in which I'm working with the parent, and the parent is saying, my kid is anxious, my kid is anxious, my kid is irritable when they get home from school. And then I ask, okay, are they doing it at school? Oh no, the teacher would be very surprised to hear some of this. All right, and so is it possible? Yes, and in fact, we have a term for it. It happens so often. It's called self-control resource depletion, that the kid is so anxious about being embarrassed or drawing attention to themselves or doing something that might cause others to turn to them, that they hold it together well at school. And so their self-control, you can think about the gas tank. By the time they get home, they're out of self-control. And so they're irritable with parents, they get aggravated easily with parents, they get more anxious or nervous with parents. And so is it possible they repress it? Yes. Okay, does that mean it's a good thing? No, because it just means there's going to be a surge in another environment, and usually it's at home. Usually it's at home. Okay, and I know as an educator, think, well, that's good, as long as it's not in my classroom. But I relay that if a parent comes to you and says, my kid is anxious and my kid is irritable, don't think automatically, oh, you're a bad parent. Think, okay, this kid is really holding it together at school, and that's actually helping them to run out of juice by the time they get home, and they get a lower threshold for reacting. And so think about ways to maybe help the kid control their anxiety more at school, rather than just, I don't want to make a noise, I don't want to embarrass myself. Good. Next question.
How can parents, or how can teachers help parents deal with their anxiety? Many times the parents are more anxious than the child is, and that really could go for, this is particularly for preschool, but really I think that could be for any age student. How do we help parents?
Yes. How do you help parents? That is a great question, all right? So how can you as a teacher help parents? Well, I'm hoping you've got some ideas or things you might want to consider. I would say probably two things. Number one, to know your boundary, okay? To know that unless you're trained as a mental health provider, you shouldn't be providing counseling or therapy to these folks, okay? And so know your boundary, know your lane, and stay in your lane, but also know, you know, I'm around a lot of parents. I'm hearing some things from you that I'm not used to hearing. Have you talked with your pediatrician about potential treatment options in the community, all right? And quite often, treatment for an anxious kid involves co-treatment for an anxious adult, all right? So the first thing I would say is to know your boundaries and stay in your lane, but don't assume that kid's getting treated. Remember, only a third are being treated. 2/3 are not. Okay, number two is to try to understand the source of the anxiety. Anxiety lives in the future, right? So it has to be something about the future. Usually parents are concerned about what the kid's going to be like in the future as an adult, okay? And so maybe try to get the parent out of thinking about the future and thinking much more about today. What can you do today to help? Yes, I hear you that you want your kid to go to college. He's in the 3rd grade, so let's talk about some things today that you think are going to equip him to be ready to go to college. Okay, I've got an interesting statistic, all right? And so this was, again, I don't have it here on my slide, but the Pew Research Center asked college freshmen, do you think your parents would want you to be happy at the University of Arizona or depressed at Yale? Okay, so again, the question is about college freshmen asking them about their parents, right? And again, this was over 100,000 were in this. 73% of those college freshmen said, I think my parent would want me to be depressed at Yale, as opposed to happy at the University of Arizona, because Yale means I've been and again, I don't know how they chose Arizona. If I was a faculty there, I'd be a little upset. All right, and so if you've got an anxious parent, be thinking, are they thinking about the future? And if so, is that going to lead to a depressed Yale where the kid might be happy at the University of Arizona or at Syracuse University or somewhere else? Great. We got time for one more question.
Okay, I have one more from the virtual audience. Anybody here? No? Okay. How do you know when a child or student needs to see a professional outside of school for anxiety?
Yes, that's a great question. All right, I would say those 3 things that we talked about when anxiety becomes disorder. Number 1, the kid avoids age-appropriate activities. Number 2, it begins to impair their functioning. They're having less interactions with their peers. Their grades are going down. And number 3, it's causing the family and or the child a considerable amount of distress. That, all right, again, I hear a lot from parents that Sunday nights are terrible in my house because Monday morning is school. Okay, that's an example of the parents able to set their calendar according to the child's mood, and it causes distress. I hear parents say we're walking on eggshells. All right, and so the kid is doing any of those 3. Okay, it doesn't have to be all 3, it's an or. The kid's avoiding age appropriate, it's leading to a change in their functioning, or it's causing the family and or the child a considerable amount of stress, that's when you say, I think you should talk with your pediatrician about referrals to mental health providers. Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for your attention, time. I hope this has been informative. I enjoyed the opportunity. So again, I want to thank Amanda.
Thank you so much, Dr. Antshel. I have the sign-in sheet on the table. When you sign out, you can sign that you were here. I forgot to put it out earlier, so I apologize. That's my fault. And the exit survey on my learning plan. If there was anything in particular that was talked about today that you want to learn more about, please put that in the survey. I'm going to be collecting that information. Dr. Antshel has said that he'd be happy to come back and do some more presentations, maybe at building specific or topic specific or age specific, anything that you're more interested in, or anything related to social emotional learning or well-being of children, adults, whatever, anything else you want to learn. We have some grant money. We'd be happy to explore bringing in some experts on those topics, okay? Thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it.